We are starting a new series this morning that I'm calling I Am. So if you were about to tell me who you are, you might start off with I am, maybe you're funny. I am kind. Maybe that might be a way you would describe yourself. Maybe you would describe yourself by I would say I am a wife. I am a mother. There are various ways that we identify ourselves. Some of us would just identify ourselves with our names. I'm Tammy. And names are really important. For those of you who are new, who don't know me very well, I have 3 children, Taylor, Wesley, and Maya. And when you are about to have a child, you spend a lot of time thinking about what their name is going to be. Because names are important. They're stuck with this name forever. Oh, I see Cruz back there. We have a new baby in our midst in our church family. Sorry, I got very distracted by a very cute baby in the back who I haven't got to meet yet. I kind of want to run down there, Yvonne, and just muckle onto him, but I can't because I got to keep going. But Cruz has a great name. Names are important, and we choose these names for our children. So all of my children, their middle name has some pretty good significance. Taylor's middle name is my middle name, is my mother's middle name. I'm not going to tell you what that middle name is because neither Taylor or I probably want you to know. But we share the same middle name, and my son's middle name is my husband's middle name, and my youngest daughter, Maya, her middle name is beautiful. Her middle name is Adelaide. It was Peter's grandmother's name, and she passed away the same year Maya was born. There's significance in the names that we give our children. Now, I'm going to be really honest with you this morning. Some of you know this already. I'm actually really terrible at remembering people's names. So if we've met before and you've told me your name, and the next time we meet, I look at you blankly, just be kind to me and just tell me what your name is. I'm really bad, especially with all the kids who are running around here because I just can't quite keep their names straight. So I often say, hey, buddy, or something because I can't remember their name. But names are really important, particularly names in the Bible. Because a lot of the names in the Bible, they're not just how we identify someone. They actually have real significance. It reveals something about who they are, something about their character. And in the Bible, there are actually many names to refer to God, too. And each one of these names, it kind of reveals a different aspect of his character, a different aspect of who he is. It helps us to see God more accurately, which is really important because I would say the majority of us in this room actually have an inaccurate perspective of who God is because he's just so incredible. His character is so extensive. And we all have something to learn about him. The other thing is we all have views of who God is based on circumstances, based on how we grew up, based on things that we've heard, based on things that we've seen or experiences that we've had or experiences that we've had with people who say that they're followers of Jesus and seem like representatives of God to us, but maybe aren't the best example. And the problem is, if we have a messed up view of who God is, it's going to impact our relationship with him. If we have a messed up idea of how God sees us, what he thinks of us when he looks at us, it's going to impact the way we even see ourselves. Of all the names of God, perhaps the most important one is the name that he actually gives himself. Literally, someone asks him, what is your name? What should I call you? And this is the name that he says. And this singular name reveals some really profound truths about who he is to us. The story comes out of the book of Exodus. The Exodus is a book in the Old Testament. The Old Testament is the very large section of the Bible at the beginning, and it chronicles the life that and the interactions of God and his people, the Israelites. If you're familiar with the biblical characters at all, you may have heard of a guy named Moses. Moses was born when the Israelites, so that's God's chosen people, were actually slaves in Egypt. Now, Egypt was one of the most powerful nations on the planet at that time. And their leader, Pharaoh, he was feeling a little bit threatened by the Israelites because while they were in captivity, lots of Israelite children were born. And he was getting a little nervous because they were starting to get outnumbered. And he was afraid of rebellion. Because you can imagine, like, these slaves, they're building everything for him. They're building his empire. And what is he going to do if all of these slaves rebel against him? So he's getting a little nervous. And he decides that he needs to trim this population a little bit. And so he gives an order that every newborn baby boy that is born to the Israelites, and this is going to sound really awful, but he gives an order that every one of those boys should be thrown into the Nile River and drown. Like, that's his plan, to subdue the Israelites. Now, in order to save Moses when he is born, his mother puts him in a basket and floats him down the Nile River. And that's where Moses is found. He's found by one of Pharaoh's daughters, actually, and he's raised an Egyptian. He's raised in the palace. He has the best teaching. He has the best life. He's raised in the Egyptian palace. As he gets older, he starts to put some things together about his identity and about who he truly is. And he's trying to navigate this, and he's trying to work it out. And he finds that he's not actually an Egyptian. He's actually an Israelite. He was born an Israelite. That's who he is. And one day, he sees this Egyptian who is completely mistreating an Israelite slave. And maybe in an attempt to show solidarity with his own people, he gets really upset about it. He gets really mad, and he actually kills this Egyptian who is mistreating this slave. But the Israelites, they're not as happy as maybe Moses would have thought or hoped that they would be at his act of solidarity. They're not actually really impressed with him at all. And on top of that, the Egyptians are also after him because he's committed murder. So he takes off. He's on the run. He leaves Egypt and he ends up in a place called Midian, kind of in the middle of nowhere. And that's where this story happens. He's been there for decades. He's married a woman, I think her name's Zipporah, and works for her father. So he works for his father-in-law for a really long time as a shepherd. And one day he's out in his field with his sheep, and he sees a bush that is on fire, but it's not burning up. So just put yourself in that position for a second. Pretty bizarre. You're out in the fields, you're looking after your sheep, minding your business, trying to keep these sheep from taking off, and all of a sudden you look over and here's this bush that is on fire, but it's not burning up. Pretty weird, kind of bizarre. But he chooses to go over and check it out. And he goes to see what's going on. And when he does, a voice speaks to him from this burning bush. And he knows, somehow he knows, that God is speaking to him. And God has a message for Moses in that moment. And God tells Moses that he's about to rescue the Israelites from centuries of slavery. And I imagine Moses being like, cool, great. Thanks for telling me. Like, this is exciting. I'm glad this is going to happen. But then God tells him, you, Moses, are the one that I'm actually going to use to make this happen. Now, I don't know about you, but I'd be freaking out for a variety of reasons. A, there's a burning bush that's not burning and it's talking to me. And B, God is telling me that he's about to use me to do something significant. Like, I would be freaking out. And obviously, Moses is freaking out a little bit too. And he has some objections, right? Like, whoa, hold on, wait a minute. So the plan is, I'm supposed to go and tell the Israelites, I'm supposed to tell them that I was in the wilderness and this bush was burning but not burning up, and from that bush you told me to tell them to pack up their stuff and we're going back home. They're gonna escape slavery, and they're gonna believe that? Hey, it's a pretty wild, far-fetched story to come from a guy like me. And then it gets better. I'm supposed to go to Pharaoh and say, you know, all these slaves that you have that have been working for you, building your kingdom, well, this burning bush told me to tell you that it's time to let them go. Like, how exactly is that all going to work? Like, that's how I would feel if I were Moses. So he has these objections. And one of the objections that he gives to God is, he says, if I go to the Israelites, they're going to ask me, what is the name of the God who told you this? What am I supposed to say? See, Moses grew up an Egyptian, and the Egyptians worshipped hundreds of God. So he's saying, like, which one am I supposed to say? What name do I say? He doesn't necessarily realize, or doesn't seem to realize, that the Israelites actually only have one God. And it's interesting to me because God doesn't even try to correct him in it. He just answers him. And so we're picking up the story in Exodus 3, verse 14, where it says, God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. I am who I am. Like, what kind of name is that? What does that even tell us about who God is? Well, I think it tells us a couple things. When God says, I am who I am, it tells us that he is a person, that he can be known. He is not a force in the universe. He's not the universe. He is a person who can be known and who wants to know us. Now, I don't know where you're coming from spiritually today, but there would be some people who view God as an impersonal force in the universe. And they often say things like, sending good vibes from the universe, or the universe brought us together, which sound really nice. Like, they really do. But if you are open to the possibility that God is a person who designed the universe and controls it, who knows you intimately and loves you, like, isn't that way better than a force in the universe? The God of the Bible is a personal God. Another thing we learn from God's name, I am who I am, is he is who he is. Maybe that sounds simple, but regardless of what we think about him, he is who he is. Before I became a follower of Jesus, I followed a God I believed in a God. I didn't follow a God. I believed in a God who fit very conveniently in the box that I had created for him. You know, the God who did good things for me. But that's just not the case. He is who he is. You can't have your own version of God. I can't have my own version of God. Sometimes we'll say things like, my God would never do that. But the truth is, he's not whatever you've made up, whatever I've made up. God exists beyond our imagination, and he doesn't change based on the way that we see him. When my kids were young, they like to go to Build-A-Bear. Does anyone? I mean, there is still Build-A-Bear, but you know what I'm talking about when I say Build-A-Bear? Like, you go into the store, right? You pick out your bear, your stuffed animal. It's not even a bear, just a bear anymore. You can make all kinds of things. And you pick like what you're going to put inside of this bear. Like, you can put a little voice in your bear or a little heart in your bear, and you pick out the clothes and you pick out a name, and you just like you go through this whole experience where you are basically designing this bear that you want. You name it whatever you want. You make it look however you want. You dress it. You can even give it a little voice and make it say what you want. It gets pretty wild. God isn't a Build-A-Bear. You can't build him however you want. You can't make him look like you want him to. You can't make him say what you want him to. He is who he is. And my hope for us over these next number of weeks as we walk through this series is that you will actually begin to see him better. You will begin to see God for who he is. And as you begin to see God for who he is, it will give you a better understanding of who you are. And I can guarantee you that who he is better than anything you could ever imagine. So God is a personal God. He is never changing. But that still doesn't tell us quite enough about him. And so a bit later in the story, in Moses' story, at this point, he knows way more about God. He's had all kinds of experiences with him, but he says, God, show me your glory. Like, he's asking him for this overwhelming abundance of God's presence around him. Now, it's not as if Moses hadn't experienced God's presence before, because at this point in the story, he had encountered God with this burning bush experience. He had witnessed all of these wonders associated with God's deliverance of his people out of Egypt. So maybe some of you, even if you're new to church, you might have heard the story of the parting of the Red Sea, or you watched the movie The Prince of Egypt. Moses had seen a pillar of cloud and, no, wait, that's not right. He had been led by a cloud and a pillar of fire. All of the Israelites had been led that way. He had experienced that in their journey. He had observed these stunning and natural signs of God's presence at Mount Sinai. And then, of course, Moses had this unique privilege, this just incredible privilege that he had of speaking to God. Like, it blows my mind, this whole idea that Moses spoke to God. The scriptures say that he spoke to him face to face, as like one who is speaking to a friend. Like, can you imagine that? To be able to speak to God face to face as a friend? Oh, it's just it's the coolest description. And so Moses had all of these experiences. Imagine having all of these experiences, and yet Moses wanted more. He wanted more. He wanted to experience God more. He wanted to know him more. So when Moses asks to see God's glory, God agrees. In Exodus 33:19 it says, "And the Lord said, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion." And there's a little farther down in the story, it says, "Then the Lord came down in the cloud and stood there with him and proclaimed his name, the Lord. And he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin." How does Moses truly come to know who God is? Like, how do we truly come to know who God is? Well, Moses kept seeking him. He kept seeking him. It didn't matter how many encounters Moses had with God. He kept seeking him. He kept longing for more. He asks the Lord to continually show him who he is. He wants to know him more. And as Moses truly sees and understands who God is, he also begins to see who he truly is. And the scriptures say his response was, Moses bowed to the ground at once and worshiped. He bowed to the ground and worshiped. He saw God for who he truly was. And the only response he could have was to put his face on the ground and worship him for who he was. To understand who we are, we need to understand who God is. To truly understand who we are, we need to understand who God is. We're going to go through this series over the next number of weeks. And we're really going to dig deep and explore who God is. We're going to explore the Trinity. It's a churchy word if you're new. That God is 3 in 1. We're going to explore all the parts of that and what that means for us. We're going to dig deep to understand, to the best that we can, who God is. And the intention of us digging deep to understand who God is so that we can firmly root our identity in him. Not what the world tells us. Not what your friend tells you. Not what your enemy tells you. Firmly root your identity, who you are, in who God is. How he sees you. What that means for us as we try to live our lives for him. And so today I want to pray for us. My prayer for us in this series is that we would actually be overwhelmed by who God is. That it would change us. We would be overwhelmed by his compassion, his love for us. We would be overwhelmed by his grace, by his faithfulness. We would be overwhelmed by his forgiveness. We would be overwhelmed by his peace. That we would begin to see him rightly for who he is. the King. And we would position ourselves rightly because of who he is. That this journey that we're going to go on in the next few weeks, it would change us, all of us. That we would know him more. And so to close today, I want to pray a prayer over us that the Apostle Paul prayed over the church in Ephesus as we launch into this journey together to truly discover who God is and who we are in him. And so I want to invite you to stand with me this morning. And if you're open to it, there's no pressure, but if you're open to it, just as a physical demonstration of receiving what God has for us, positioning ourselves in a way that over these next number of weeks, we could receive all that he has for us. I just want to encourage you, maybe you even want to close your eyes as I pray, as I read this prayer, but to hold your hands out. We're letting go of everything that we think we know and understand, but we're also opening our hands up to receive all that he has for us. And so Paul prayed this over the church in Ephesus. For this reason, I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name. I pray that out of his glorious riches, he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power, together with all the Lord's holy people, to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know his love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. Now, to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, to him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen.